Hi, Sai. We're waiting for Bill to join. He'll be there any moment. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Abby,
Hi,
how are
Bill.
you?
Good evening.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, am I audible to you? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Oh, great, great. How are you? And how are situations over there?
Things are good here. It's in the afternoon. Where I live right now, the COVID is not very bad. There's
Uh-huh.
not many new cases. I'm in Florida right now, so right here it's been very good.
Oh, great. Great to hear that. Great to hear that. Are you adequately dosed? Have you taken the vaccine by any
I don't like
chance?
to talk about my health issue, but yeah, I do have I'm vaccinated. Yes.
Great, awesome, great, awesome. So, primarily, in fact, first of all, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to call you, in fact, on this Insta Live and talk about a few of the because there when I talk about what I have learned from you and what I have been following, specifically in terms of education. I maybe this night will be slightly short of it, but specifically, I would want to talk about two major topics. That is performance nutrition and sustainable fat loss. That I would be basically because these are the primarily things anybody who is not competing or either in a limited capacity competing on some other platform would want to know that how they can enhance the performance if in case there are any specific food, any specific routine, any specific supplement that they can have in their routine life that can enhance the performance apart from anabolic steroid. We will not talk about that. And certainly, if in case anybody want to have a sustainable fat loss throughout their lives, how much they can expect as a good amount of fat loss, how for how long can they maintain that, what is the reality check for them, what is a sustainable sort of thing that they can have for a prolonged period of time. So around that we'll be talking about if in case there is any specific health markers that they need to be very mindful of, timely blood test and other health markers also that they would want to maybe have a periodic check on. So we'll talk about that.
All right, that sounds good.
Sound good to you? Okay, great. So first of all, I would begin with there is a recent book that you have published. So can you talk something about that book and what the audience can expect from that?
Yeah, so that's a digital guidebook. It's like an ebook. And it basically, I partnered with a company in Australia called Clean Health Fitness Institute. So they are the publisher of that book. And essentially, what that book is, it's the first book I've ever written that's not an academic textbook.
Okay.
It's basically all of my thoughts, references a lot of the research that I've done on fat loss and muscle gain. So two main sections. First
Mm-hmm.
half of the book is all about nutrition for a sustainable fat loss. So it's not so much a let's lose fat now. It's more of a lifestyle approach. So these are the habits, this is the mindset, and then these are the strategies to lose fat and then to keep it off. Then
Mm-hmm.
the last half of the book is really focused on resistance training to gain as much muscle as possible. And I give a system for easily tracking volume, controlling for intensity. And then there's also some videos for a true beginner that's that hasn't really resistance trained before. There's video links to a lot of the exercises that I have listed in the program.
Oh, okay, great. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, what I understand from you that there is something for everybody in that, even if in case they are into beginning of resistance training or mediocre level or maybe experienced as well.
Yes, yeah, I would say it's something for everyone. I would say if somebody's buying this that's a bodybuilding competitor,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that is not the target audience, but it is for anybody who is short of that. So if you have clients, fat loss clients,
Yeah.
clients that are trying to build muscle mass, but I don't get into how to get stage lean in that area. But short of that, yeah, I think it has pretty broad appeal. And I thank you for asking.
Great, great. Yeah. So, talking about what has been your PhD in primarily, Bill, what have you primarily studied and what does your research says?
My PhD was fairly broad. It was in exercise, nutrition, and preventive health.
Mm-hmm.
And my research has, over the last few years, has focused really on fat loss and building muscle in people who are already fit. So it's, as a grad student, I researched obesity. I studied obesity
Okay.
and weight loss in an obese population. And then over time, I've gravitated towards studying bodybuilders and, again, fitness, serious fitness people who want to lose more fat or who want to gain more muscle. That, and traditionally, like the first half of my career, I spent a lot of my time doing sports nutrition research. So in summary, I do sports nutrition research and what I call physique enhancement, which is helping
Mm-hmm.
people who are serious about fitness have little less body fat and gain more muscle if that's what they want to do.
Okay, great. So, just in fact, what happens that primarily, if in case anybody is focusing on bodybuilding as a sport, or maybe trying to be an athlete, a field athlete, how different their nutrition would be?
The main difference between somebody who's stepping on the stage as a competitive bodybuilder and then somebody who just wants to look like that but not step on stage, I think it's just it's an area of degrees or a perspective of how serious do you want to do this. So a bodybuilder is not going to be able to maintain that condition. What I like to do is help people get as lean as they can be
Mm-hmm.
and then maintain that within their normal lifestyle. So that, I think that's the main difference. What I do and what I research is to help people maintain relatively lower levels of body fat percentage such that bodybuilders can't do that. Their calories
Yes.
are too low for too long of a period of time. And I like to think of what I do as like a lifestyle bodybuilding approach.
Yep. Great. And how about a track and field athlete? Basically, a performance athlete, maybe a sprinter, maybe a long distance runner, maybe a footballer, something of that sort. So, who are basically performance athletes. So, how different their nutrition would be?
Yeah, so I look at those as two different people. I have athletes and then I have people that are trying to optimize their physiques.
Mm-hmm.
Athletes really don't want to spend much time dieting because they have to perform. And when you're dieting, you're generally not going to perform as well. And you're not going to be able to adapt from your training stimulus as well. So that's the first difference. People interested in having an optimal physique, they're going to spend more of their year in a caloric deficit or dieting. Athletes hopefully do not spend as much time there. The other thing is that I tend not to reduce or recommend reducing carbohydrates in athletes. For
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's trying to lose fat, reducing carbs is not a big deal. I don't have much hesitation in doing that for that type of athlete. Protein intakes are about the same. I don't really distinguish too much between an athlete and somebody who's trying to lose body fat or live this physique lifestyle.
Okay.
Yeah, other than that, I think those are the main differences. So calories and carbs are the two biggest differences.
Okay. Okay. Any specific food choices in terms of carbs, like rice cream, white rice, or maybe mashed potatoes, or maybe sweet potatoes, something of that sort? Any specific food choices, differentiation between these two?
No, I tend not to get too too detailed on carbohydrate sources. I mean, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
get technical, you have high glycemic, low glycemic. I think that stuff starts to matter if you are in a caloric deficit. But for athletes and people who aren't really, really low on calories, I don't think there's much of a difference. I think that you get your 4 calories per gram. There is some slight hormonal response differences, some slight
Mm-hmm.
insulin or insulinogenic responses to some of these carbs, but I think that's so trivial that ultimately it doesn't matter.
Okay, great point. Thank you. Any specific supplement that you use for performance athletes and also for the bodybuilding arena?
Yeah, so I don't know if we're going to count protein, but protein would definitely be a supplement that I recommend that people take if they can't get their recommended amounts of protein through diet alone.
Mm-hmm.
But supplements that I think should be that everybody should take are creatine, vitamin D if they are deficient in vitamin D, and a lot of, well, maybe not most, a lot of
Absolutely
people
agree.
are,
Yeah.
even athletes, and a lot of people don't appreciate that. And then the other one is fish oil for general health benefits, some joint integrity benefits
Mm-hmm.
as well. So those would be the three, whether or not they're an athlete or trying to lose body fat, build more muscle. Creatine, fish oil, vitamin D if needed, but usually it is. And then for a lot of people, protein supplementation.
Okay, vitamin D3 with a combination of magnesium or just vitamin D3?
No, I think yeah, vitamin D3, and I appreciate you saying D3 because there's also vitamin D2,
Yeah, yeah.
and we know that that one's not as good. It's not worthless. It's just not. It does not raise blood levels of
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D as much. And
Yeah.
then yes, a magnesium supplement to help the bioavailability of the vitamin D would be helpful.
Absolutely. Very well point. Thank you so much for that point. And if in case anybody is going for any supplements like caffeine for the performance enhancement, caffeine or maybe say citrulline malate or maybe beta alanine into some sort of mixture, if in case there is a pre-workout or maybe they're taking into isolation just to have an experiment in, how does that impact to the performance?
Well, I think you just mentioned the three other supplements that I would recommend, and there's not many that I would recommend, but those are the three that I think there's plenty of science to suggest they're helpful for certain situations.
Correct.
So it was what, caffeine, beta alanine, and what was the other one?
Citrulline malate.
Citrus, yes. So yeah, now I personally don't take any of them right now. I mean, I get some caffeine in my diet sodas that I drink, but let's just talk about each one of those. So caffeine, I think, is one of the best fat loss ingredients that you can buy. It causes the breakdown of fat, so we call that lipolysis. It increases resting metabolic rate, and over time, that should result in fat loss. The other thing that I really like about caffeine is it blunts appetite in some people. So if you are dieting, you're not as hungry when you take caffeine. The other thing that I like about caffeine is it lowers your perception of exercise intensity or the effort. So if you are dieting and you want to increase your cardio, your aerobic activity, the caffeine will help make that a little bit easier in many people. So caffeine, and then we know that caffeine is very important for endurance performance. A lot of research to suggest it increases power output. And again, like I said, decreases
and delays the perception of fatigue as well. Yeah, in that.
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
and I think that's very important. So caffeine, again, I don't personally take it for any of those things, but I'm not an athlete, and I'm not. My cardio is mostly walking at this point, so I'm not. I don't feel a need for it. Citrulline malate is another very good supplement. It's probably one of the better pre-workout supplements. I would suggest that people make sure they get about 6 grams. That seems to be the effective dosage. And I think that comes out to about 3 grams of citrulline, 3 grams of malate. But citruline's the main ingredient there to improve like blood flow, a little bit more endurance performance. And beta alanine, and there I think just trying to go off the top of my head, I think there the effective dose is also about 3 grams.
3.2, yeah, somewhere about that.
Yeah. And that one, if you know your exercise is going to be high intensity, where you're going to have a lot of lactic acid buildup, that is where that supplement is really good. It helps improve exercise performance in a very acidic environment. So rowers, anything where you're going, or if you're doing resistance training with high repetitions and you're going to have this big buildup of lactic acid, there is a really good application for taking beta alanine.
Okay, great. So I was reading one article, and in that it was being mentioned that every human should respond to caffeine adequately. And if in case caffeine does not respond to any body, probably there are any sort of adrenal gland malfunction, or there may be something problem with the adrenal glands. Is that so? Because I have seen some few people and some of my friends as well who react differently to caffeine. Somebody would be, if in case they take I think around 8 p.m. they take, or 7 p.m. they take a caffeine drink, they'll be awake till say 3 in the morning. And there are few people like my father, he'll have a cup of coffee and he'll sleep. So how does that vary?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say I haven't studied the adrenal effects of caffeine, but I'll just give my general thoughts, which I think will suffice, at least in terms of my thoughts. Now, again, I have
Yeah.
not researched this, so caffeine, everybody's going to respond differently to everything. So, as an example, I've been studying vitamin D lately. If I give somebody 5,000 IUs of vitamin D, some people are going to increase their levels by double. Other people might only increase by 10%. So everybody across the board is going to respond differently to a supplement. Caffeine, we know that we have people who are much more responding to caffeine than others. And now there's been some work out of Canada. Nancy Guest is one of the premier researchers in this area, that they've identified a genetic aspect to one's not only tolerance, but their response to caffeine. So clearly some of this is genetic. You're asking, well, what about if there's an adrenal context to somebody's responsiveness to caffeine? And I would say that may be true.
Yeah.
I just would feel like I need to study that more to come up with a mechanism or an explanation. So I think it easily could be the case, and I think that maybe it's not the case. It could just be a genetic predisposition to
Quite possible.
somebody. Yeah.
Possible. Any specific dosage of caffeine that you would recommend for performance athletes and bodybuilders?
Yeah, the research generally says 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So as an absolute dose, that's about like 200, maybe a little bit more as an absolute dose for most people. So that's what has been shown for sports nutrition purposes. And when you go above that, when you go above the 3 to 6 milligrams per kg, let's say you go to 9, it seems like you're not getting an added benefit with the added dosage. So it seems like there's like a titration effect where it starts to level out.
Yeah. So there is one more myth around caffeine usage, is that you should not use caffeine for a very prolonged period of time, else your body gets used to it. You stop responding to caffeine. How true is that?
That's what I'm going to say. I don't have a strong opinion on. I used to think that was the case, but then I read some research from Lawrence Spreet, that's spelled Spriet. He's probably one of the recognized experts in caffeine and sports performance area. And he's written some papers that challenge that, where the body doesn't become desensitized to it. Now, that doesn't mean he's right. I think he was opening up, hey, there's a possibility that some people don't have this. I would say in general, it makes sense. But then again, you have things like creatine. Creatine, you want to keep taking it daily to keep your saturation levels high. Once you go above a certain threshold, you're not getting a greater benefit. But if you stop taking creatine, then your levels go down if your dietary sources are not high. So with caffeine, if I were going to take caffeine, which I don't right now, I would cycle it. I would say, yeah, it makes sense that I want to kind of save this for times of my training or my competition season or fat loss phases, when I would want it to have a greater impact. But as I say that, I do know that some of the people that I respect would challenge that.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite possible that. Yeah. And so there is, while in fact there were a few questions that people were asking, there is one very important question that I get from a few of my friends and few of my clients as well, that while we are planning for a physique transformation, or maybe for a fat loss, dietary protocols for a woman versus a men, will there be any change? Because women go through a lot of change into their life cycle, into their say life period as well. There are menopause, there are different mood swings, there are different hormonal controls in their body going into, and at times they come to a situation where they really struggle to lose some sort of stubborn body fat. So how different their nutrition would be?
So generally speaking, I don't prescribe different programs for females versus males.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's always going to be individualized. Now we do get into the area of menstrual cycle, and is there the there to answer that, there is some evidence that you can make changes based
Mm-hmm.
on increasing hunger or hunger suppression throughout the different cycle. Again, but I'm going to make that individual to the client,
Yep.
because just because research says this, as you know, research is average. This is the average response, but not everybody's average. Some people have a greater or lesser response.
Yep.
So generally, I'm going to say I recommend the pretty much the same caloric deficit. And again, I've done this in my lab. We've tested females and males, and by and large, we get the same outcomes. Now, that doesn't mean that, again, on the individual level, that you wouldn't make adjustments. The other big change here is menopause with females. And what I've noticed in that population is just a lack of responsiveness to training and even a caloric deficit in some situations. So that's where I'm learning a lot about that population right now. And I think it makes sense to try to optimize, or try to, if there's nothing that's wrong with general health markers, see a physician who may be able to fine tune things. And again, this isn't me. I'm not an endocrinologist, but
Yep.
are there things that could be adjusted to help stimulate fat loss? And some of the things that could be looked at is thyroid hormone levels. I just worked with somebody recently where vitamin D levels were relatively low, so we did increase that. Um, and the other thing that I see with that population is lack of energy. So just not as energetic, or their readiness to train isn't as much. But assuming everything is not, assuming all health markers are good, and even what
Mm-hmm.
I would call optimization markers, I wouldn't change much in a menopausal female. I already recommend protein intakes that are very high, or generally high.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that as you age, you need higher protein. But again, I recommend
Yep.
higher protein even for young people. So that really, that when I give my general recommendations, that still covers an aging population. I would ask you,
Okay.
do you work with menopausal clients?
Yeah, we do, in fact, but somehow, in fact, since, as you rightly mentioned, we are not endocrinologists, so I do refer them to, in fact, consult the endocrinologist, because they will be able to best assess the situation and accordingly guide.
So what, and I'll just say this, the one client that and it's not a client, just somebody that I was helping, they
Mm-hmm.
had a pretty high level of reverse T3. And
Mm-hmm.
that, so the doctor that this person went to, they prescribed her some T3 to kind of elevate the active thyroid hormone to
Uh-huh.
offset this reverse T3. So that'll be interesting. That she just started that within the last month. So I'm looking forward to seeing how her body will respond to that.
Okay, great. That's a great point. I'll read more reverse P3. Yeah. So since you were talking about high protein intake, what is the optimal protein intake that you recommend to your people, your athletes, or maybe your clients?
Yeah, I recommend 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or in my country would say 1 gram per pound.
Mm-hmm.
That is higher than even most sports nutritionists recommend. We Most of our research would say 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram
Absolutely, yeah.
is adequate. And I would agree that that is adequate, that you shouldn't expect to gain much more muscle mass when you go higher than that. But I'm aware of a few studies where when protein intakes are higher than that, one of the studies being from my own lab, that fat loss or a not gaining additional body fat is the outcome. And if for somebody who's dieting, when you have higher protein intakes, that tends to help with hunger and helps you adhere to your diet better. And we know it helps protect muscle mass when dieting.
Yep.
So I like to just make my recommendations relatively simple. 2.2 grams per kg. If you can't hit that amount, okay, you're still going to be better off even at 2 or 1.8 or even as low as 1.6. But the benefits of higher, I think there's no harm, and the research would suggest sometimes a benefit and never a harm or a detriment to performance or physique outcomes.
Yep. So in fact, I was hearing one of your podcasts, and that somebody asked that, can anybody even lose fat on a calorie surplus? To which you said yes, if in case everything else is constant and you have increased the protein intake. So yes, there is a possibility of losing the body fat.
Yes, and two clarifications on that. I've seen that in, I think it was 3 different studies, and I've seen it, well, 2 things. As long as the only thing increasing is protein, that's the only, again, if you increase carbs and fat, then I don't think you should expect to gain fat.
Yeah.
And the other thing is if they are resistance training. So the 2 guidelines are, if you're resistance training and you only increase protein, I'm not aware of any study that would suggest that you gain body fat under those scenarios. I am aware of research where you either lose body fat relative to baseline levels, or you don't gain additional body fat. Now that again, those are averages. I could be wrong, but I feel very good about telling people, if you're struggling with hunger and you're fit, if you increase protein, I think you don't have to be very concerned about gaining body fat.
Okay, great. So, in fact, if you see in the industry and also in the people, there is a lot of myth around faster fat loss. And the first thing that they say shuttle down to, either it is very low carb diet or getting into a keto diet. Okay. Does performance of an athlete get adversely impacted once they are getting to a keto diet? Because in that you are limiting your calorie intake of carbohydrate, which is the primary source of energy to your body.
Yeah, if we're going to limit this to athletes, if that's our application, yeah, I would not recommend a ketogenic diet to many athletes, or to any athletes really, because the research is fairly clear, consistent, that it decreases exercise performance.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, relative for athletes or for people who are trying to optimize their physiques, it's just not the best diet for gaining muscle mass. It does seem to put some limits on, or do limit the effectiveness of the anabolic stimulus from resistance training. Does that mean that I would never recommend a ketogenic diet? No, ketogenic diets have some great points and they have some great applications for certain people. But an athlete who needs to perform, especially if their performance is high intensity, football, what we would call soccer, basketball, those types of sports where you need sprinting, anaerobic endurance, I wouldn't recommend it, because of again, I'm basing that on just the research that's been published, and a lot of that more recently.
Okay. So one very great question that I was interacting to one of the people on Instagram, and we were talking about the science of fat loss. Is the science of fat loss just based on calorie consumption and calorie burnout, or it is more than that as well?
I would say that the calories in, calories out, that's probably 95% of somebody's focus. If most people focus on just decreasing calories, whether that's by decreasing food or increasing caloric expenditure, both are going to result in fat loss. But I said 95%. I believe there are some people who are in a caloric deficit who cannot lose fat. And that probably means some type of physiological shortcoming, some type of physiological issue that needs to be addressed. But I think a lot of people assume that a caloric deficit isn't working for them when they're not consistently in a caloric deficit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always the issue.
Yeah, so I'm not one of those people who says, yep, calories in, calories out, 100% of the time, all the time. I most of the time, yes. But when it doesn't happen and we know that they're in a caloric deficit, okay, well, now we're going to have to really fine tune some things.
Okay, great. Any of your specific choice of intra-workout supplement that you recommend for
Wait,
anyone?
ask that one more time. What kind of supplement?
Intra-workout.
Oh, no, not really. I'm not aware of any research to suggest it. I'm just thinking for myself. I don't know of any benefit that you would get intra workout. I mean, first of all, your blood flow during your workout is not going to prioritize digestion. Your blood flow is prioritizing your peripheral tissues, muscle, adipose tissue to some extent as well. Now, if somebody's in a very severe caloric deficit, so their calories are really low, well, now maybe a pre-work or your peri-workout or during your workout have some carbohydrates. Well, that might make sense. That might give you a little bit more energy. Insulin levels are still going to be low. Exercise suppresses insulin levels, even in the presence of elevated carbohydrates. So I don't think there is going to be an insulin response during the workout. But that would be the time when I would suggest it makes sense for somebody to have an intra-workout supplement. And even then, I would just say carbs. Unless we're talking about an endurance athlete who's going to be exercising for 2-3 hours, well, then clearly carbohydrates would be helpful, caffeine to help their performance. But for resistance training, I don't think there's any harm. But if you're looking for a benefit, I think it's theoretical. And let me also say, I could be wrong. Just because I don't see it, I'm willing to change my mind if data comes out.
Absolutely. And I asked that question specifically because there is a lot of myth around having BCAA, which is the most selling supplement after whey protein.
Yeah.
There's a lot of education, a lot of myth around BCAA as an intra-workout supplement to boost up your performance and muscle, say lean mass gain or muscle protein synthesis. There are different and several brands which are giving a combination of 4:1:1, 2:1:1 composition of leucine, isoleucine, valine, all that stuff.
Yeah. So my thoughts on BCAAs are, I don't. Well, first of all, we have to appreciate. I'm aware of about 5 studies in humans where they gave humans BCAAs and then they measured muscle protein synthesis. 2 of those studies showed a decrease in muscle protein synthesis. This is when it was infused. I think the other 2 showed an increase in muscle protein synthesis, and then the 3rd study was no different. So the data is not even overwhelmingly positive on BCAA alone relative to muscle protein synthesis. The other thing is, in my opinion, it's not even closely as good as whey protein. When you take whey protein, 1/3 of the amino acids in whey protein are branched chain amino acids. So if you're taking whey protein, you're getting branched chain amino acids. And the way that muscle protein synthesis works is, yes, leucine, which is one of the BCAAs, yes, that increases or turns on this anabolic stimulus, but you need all of the essential amino acids. You need all of the non-essential amino acids to build muscle. Yep. So whey protein does that, or casein protein, or soy protein. Name your protein: chicken, beef, fish, eggs. I think anytime a whole protein source would be more beneficial than just BCAAs. And the other thing is just your finances. I'm going to pay more for a bottle of BCAAs than I would for the same amount of whole whey protein. and I'm
Exactly.
getting a
Yeah.
third of the third of the amino acids anyway. So I don't think it makes sense financially, and I know it doesn't make sense physiologically,
Absolutely. Yeah.
unless you have nothing else. If you're going to take BCAAs or nothing, I would say BCAAs. If your other decision is BCAAs or some whole protein, I'm going to say the whole protein every time.
Yep. And somehow, as far as I recall, they have gained much of popularity because of their taste. There are several flavors which comes into BCAA, which are not there in whey protein or any other supplement that anybody drinks out there. So just because of that drink, they kick that yes, it is maybe affecting me, it is affecting my performance, whereas it doesn't do anything. And according to research, also having more of leucine also does not instigates or enhances or elevates your anabolic growth. It does not.
Yeah, but if somebody feels like, hey, I'm exercising better, well then I'd say, okay, believe that and take them again. Psychology is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So there is one more supplement, which is, and this is the last thing I'm talking about supplement. Then we'll switch over to sustainable fat loss. How do you position fat loss? How do we plan for that? And how do we maintain that over for a prolonged period of time? Do fat burners work?
Yes, I think they do. I did a study a few years ago. I didn't publish it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did two studies. We gave males a thermogenic supplement, so it's caffeine. I think it had 250 milligrams of caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
And in that study, we showed, and we did publish that study. I think this was in 2016. That showed that there was a significant increase in resting metabolic rate. So
Okay.
if you're burning more calories through your resting metabolic rate, in theory or hypothetically, if you do that every day, every day, every day for several weeks, if nothing else changes, you should lose body fat. So then we did an 8-week resistance training study where we gave resistance trained males the same supplement. We already showed that it increased resting metabolic rate. Now we were looking at, okay, does it cause fat loss over a 8-week training period? And the answer was yes. When the subjects didn't change their diets at all, compared to placebo, they lost not much body fat. It was like maybe a little over a pound or half of a kg, but it was significantly more than the placebo group. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say, based on my research and just what I think these fat loss supplements do, which is increase metabolic rate, I think they do help. Now, would I buy them? No. Do I recommend them? No. And the
No.
reason is the benefit is not very much. You're talking like half of a kg. You might pay $30 a month for that benefit. So I would suggest go for a walk. Go for a 30-minute walk. You'll burn the same amount of calories as the caffeine. You'll have the other health benefits of the walk, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll help your appetite from the walk. So I think, and then the other thing is just as a general practice, I don't like supplements being the focus for fat loss. I like
Absolutely.
food and I like exercise being the focus. Now, that's not to say that supplements can't help. I think caffeine helps. I think, and by the way, in our study, caffeine was the primary ingredient. There were probably 15 ingredients, but 14
Yeah.
of them probably were worthless. And caffeine was the one doing all of the benefits. So
There's
do
a
they
lot of
work?
noise around yohimbine, HCl as well, and green coffee extract. That also I see primarily in most of the good, say, fat burners as well. Yohimbine HCl is primary one about which we hear a lot of noise. Does that also work?
Yeah, I'm aware of a handful of studies, 4 or 5 studies with yohimbine in humans,
Mm-hmm.
and the majority of them have showed a significant loss in body fat. One was in obese males, one was in obese females, one was in football players that were already lean.
Mm-hmm.
The only drawback was it was a skin fold assessment, so it wasn't very precise with fat loss. But yeah, yohimbine is that's one that I would suggest that if you want to take a supplement that works or that would help with fat loss, yohimbine would be one. You just have to be careful with if some people have anxiety, yohimbine can exacerbate feelings of anxiety. And then the other thing that I like about yohimbine, it actually works through a different mechanism than caffeine. Yohimbine blocks a certain kind of receptor. It's called the alpha adrenergic receptor that's on fat cells, and it's also on the nerve terminals that release norepinephrine and epinephrine, and it blocks them. And when you block the alpha adrenergic receptor, that causes a greater fat loss or a greater lipolytic, so fat breakdown response in a fat cell. So mechanistically, yohimbine makes sense. A drawback too is that it does tend to increase blood pressure when you're taking it. So yeah, you get the benefit of probably a little bit more fat loss, but it also is going to increase blood pressure. At least it does in some of the research, and in myself, that's what happens.
Yeah, and I've also studied a study where it enhances the anxiety, because primarily it is recommended that you take yohimbine somewhere about 2.5 to 5 grams on empty stomach, and then do a cardio. That's how it is recommended to have its usage. And that time it actually instigates a lot of anxiety in people, and people don't feel comfortable. That's why it is recommended that you titrate the dosage according to how your body adapts to that supplement.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm aware of the study that showed that if you take it with food, it seems that insulin tends to reduce the effects
Exactly.
of it. That's a good point.
Yeah. Great. So now we'll come down to sustainable fat loss. So whenever you have a client whose main target is some sort of moderate performance, and then but need to lose a good amount of body fat, how do you start with them?
The first thing I do is try to get a sense of what their history was. What's
Mm-hmm.
their current workout routine? What's their current diet? Have they been dieting for a long time? Are they having trouble losing additional fat? So I always want to know their history, first of all, exercise and diet history. And then I want to know what's your current caloric intake or your maintenance calorie levels. Because then I know what I can do. Or if I guess basically we have a decision working with clients. And I always like to work with my clients. I'll say, here's an example of exactly what I would do. So somebody says, hey, will you help me with a fat loss phase? I'd say, yeah. Spend 2 weeks. Let's figure out what your maintenance calories are. So once they know that, we have 3 options. We can either reduce calories, increase calories, or keep them the same, and let's just see what happens. So I'm going to work with the client on that. But that's the background information I like to get initially.
Okay. And how, from there on, once you have an assessment about the maintenance calorie, how aggressively you reduce their calorie, and what is the portion that you primarily fix for anyone? That so this percentage, keeping 2.2 grams of protein for everyone to start with, maybe, and see how they respond differently. What is the kind of ratio you put for fat and carbs?
Yeah. So starting with somebody, I would, as you suggested, a general approach is let's reduce by 25%. Let's keep protein as high as we can. So let's reduce from carbs and fat. Let's not touch protein if we, unless we have to. But that's a general recommendation. If they have, let's say, a wedding coming up, or if they are a competitor, or if they want to lose it faster, we can have that conversation. If they're not in a hurry, I think 25% of a deficit while keeping protein high, again, around 2.2 grams per kg, and assuming that they're resistance training, that seems to be a really good rate.
Yeah.
Yes, because what we've seen in my lab, and we're about to publish our latest study on a diet break study in resistance trained females. That level of caloric deficit seems to take off body fat, but you don't lose much muscle mass or lean body mass with that approach. You start going past that or becoming more aggressive. Now you might be more likely to lose fat-free mass.
Okay, great. And on an average, how long you maintain this 25% of deficit? I think that will depend on how the body is responding of anyone.
So Could you phrase that one more time? How long?
For how long you keep this deficit of 25%?
Yes.
Is it something like, is it something like a fixed tenure, or maybe it depends on how the body responds of any respective person?
Yes. I love that question because everybody's going to be different. And I
Yeah.
just got a compliment on my shirt, which I just picked up.
Yes, I saw that. I saw
Yeah.
that.
That's the director of coaching from that company. So, so hello, Stephen. Thank you for the compliment. You asked this question, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately about how long should people do this. And I'm almost right now, and I can't base this on science, but I guess you could base it on common sense. I think I'd like to almost work in gradations or in steps.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Are you familiar with the constrained energy compensation model? Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I have not read about it.
So basically, and this is something that everybody knows, if you go on a diet, you lose weight when you start, and you tend not to lose weight after a couple of weeks or a couple months. You become less and less efficient at losing body fat or body weight. This constrained energy model says that when you exercise tends to slow down your metabolism over time, so that when you exercise, it's actually working against you. Now, I don't think that's true, but that's the theory here. So, and let me say, there are aspects to this theory that are true. We all know, we all experience, if I go on a diet today, I'm going to lose more weight today than I will in 4 months. I just won't be losing the same amount of weight unless I change something. So I think a good approach would be start a diet for, let's say, 8 weeks or 6 weeks, and just reduce calories. And then you're going to get to the point where, in most people, they're going to struggle with additional fat loss. So now let's bring in an additional stimulus to the body. That next stimulus, I think, is aerobic exercise. Let's do some cardio exercise. And by the way, cardio is underappreciated for fat loss. It is a potent fat loss agent or strategy, just like a caloric deficit. Now, it just so happens a lot of people don't like to do cardio. I don't like to do cardio. But you look at the research, and I've looked at all the research comparing cardio to diets, and it's it's surprising even me, based on some of my biases going into that research. Exercise is a very effective fat loss strategy. So diet for a certain period of time. Now let's add in aerobic exercise to stimulate additional fat loss. Now, what are you going to do next? How about that yohimbine or the caffeine that you and I discussed? So now we can actually throw in supplements. So you keep adding a new stimulus to the body so that it doesn't adapt to the stimulus. And I think that's a good approach. And I don't like long diet periods. I don't like, dieting for 6 months straight. And again, if you're a bodybuilding competitor, that doesn't apply to you. You may have to do that. But 8 weeks at a time, maybe changing some of the approaches to the fat loss, I think that's an effective way to keep the body responding to a fat loss strategy.
Yep. So while in fact we are doing, as you rightly mentioned, cardio and exercise is very essential to fat loss. In case of cardio, high intensity for low period of time or low intensity for long period of time, what produces better results, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, well, let me back up 1 second. If somebody really hates doing cardio, then I'm not going to force them to do it. But if they don't have an apprehension to doing it, I just want to make sure that they appreciate you will lose fat when you increase cardio. That happens. I just looked at a study today that was published that did a systematic review, meta-analysis on high intensity versus moderate intensity cardio, and it was no difference. So I'm always going to default to, what do you like to do best? One of the problems with high intensity is that a lot of people anecdotally, or they will subjectively say, I don't recover as well from this. This is burning me out. especially when they're dieting. So I would suggest if you like doing high intensity, do high intensity. If you like moderate intensity, do that. If you like walking, walk. Of course, you're going to have to walk for a longer period of time to get the same caloric expenditure.
Yep.
But here's the thing: when you compare, the reason everybody says that diet's better than exercise for fat loss, that is because almost all of the research does say that, but almost all of that research doesn't compare an equal energy deficit. So they'll put somebody on a 500 calorie diet, and then they'll have them exercise, and they'll compare the two. But when they exercised, they only burned 150 calories. Whereas when they dieted, they lost 500 calories. And when you compare them, what do you think is going to be the winner? Well, the diet. When I'm aware of like 3 studies, only 3 in humans, maybe a handful more, but 3 good, well-designed studies where they compared they compared aerobic exercise with diet, where they had the same energy deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And the exercise groups actually lost more fat than the diet group. Both worked. And unfortunately, these were always in a non-trained population. So I'm hesitant to say that if you're highly trained, that would be the same outcome. I don't know, because we don't have data in that. But at least in beginners, exercise, if you're going to reduce calories either from diet or by exercise by 500, exercise actually gives you a little bit more fat loss, and it helps maintain your muscle mass better than the diet does.
Absolutely agree. So a slightly a different point as to what we're talking. So if in case anybody is say doing a progressive overload, or maybe following a good plan and following a good diet as well, with different kind of people, maybe a novice, or maybe a moderately experienced lifter, or maybe an experienced lifter, how much muscle mass, lean muscle mass gain that they can expect in a year's time?
Whew. Okay, I'm going to give an answer that
A realistic approach. Because what happens, I'll tell you the background of this question. Because what happens that I was interacting on a seminar on a platform, and we were talking that on bodybuilding shows, if in case you talk about international levels, only the conditioning of the bodybuilders improves, not the arm size or delt size or chest size. So at that level of experience, where bodybuilders have been exercising for say 10 years plus, almost every one of them, there are a few who have been exercising for more than 20 years as well. So why are they not able to change the size, or maybe enhance the size of their muscles? Because they always have been lifting quite heavy. Their diet is on point. There are performance enhancing drugs that they have. Even then, they cannot increase the size of their muscles. The majority of things that they are able to work on is on their conditioning, how hard they diet, how crisp they are looking on, and how dry they are looking on stage. So just in fact, thought to ask on the realistic approach and realistic expectation.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's not a good outlook. If you've been training 10 years, you're just not going to gain much muscle in your 11th and 12th year. But you do, I believe you do gain muscle. You still gain muscle, but it's small amounts. The quality of the muscle, the density of the muscle might improve, which would, I guess, just the appearance when you're very lean. So as to why that's the case, I'm just going to give a general answer, because they're closer to their genetic ceiling for what they can do naturally.
Yes.
And then the other part of that is we have a known regulator of muscle size called myostatin. So myostatin is going to exert its function, which is to regulate or control how big a muscle can get. So, yeah. But again, if I have a bodybuilder who is very on point with their training, and I look at them at year 5, year 10, and year 15, I think year 15, you're going to see a much better, not just because of conditioning, you're going to see bigger muscles than at year 5. Now, from year 10 to year 5, you're going to see even more. And then from year 10 to 15, less. So it does get less and less and less and less. There's no doubt. And that's kind of depressing.
Yep. And you rightly said they hit their genetic ceiling in that case.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was one question regarding diet break. So we'll talk about it because that is one of the foremost topic of each and every one, how to come back from a dieting phase. So once you have maybe you have reached the desired level of fat loss, maybe 10% body fat, maybe somewhere about in a single digit body fat. How do you maintain that? I'm sure you'll not be able to maintain that for a very long period of time, but moderately, to which people call, we'll do a lean bulk, or we'll try to be very near to the fat loss we have been able to achieve that. What is the approach that you take for that?
So one thing I would do with that question is at least introduce the idea that you're not going to maintain that
Mm-hmm.
you are going to have to diet again. And this is something that I'm living with in my own life. I've come to appreciate, I get lean for me, and I don't maintain it. So that just means I'm going to diet again next year, and I'm going to diet again the year after that. So essentially my life, and I think this is true for most people, it's just that people don't want to admit this. If you're going to try to live a lean lifestyle, you're going to have times when you are dieting and times where you just can't maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can't maintain it, just don't let it get out of control. So this goes back to kind of like this philosophy that I've been working on. Maybe every year I diet for a third of the year because, again, I get lean. Man, I can try to maintain it. And we can talk about how to maintain it. It's an easy philosophy. It's an easy answer, but it's a lot harder to actually implement it or execute on it. So I'm going to suggest that people just get comfortable with gaining a little weight, getting lean, trying
Mm-hmm.
to keep it, but not, and then, gaining some fat, then dieting again. And that's just part of the fitness lifestyle for people who want to be leaner. Now, to answer your question, how do you maintain it if you do get to single digits? Well, first thing I would ask is, what did you have to do to get to that condition? If you had to diet for the last 6 months and you reduce your calories by 30% and you're doing an hour and a half of cardio every day and 6 days per week of resistance training, I hate to be a pessimist. I don't think you're going to want to maintain that. And if you do maintain that, you're probably going to get divorced if you're married. You're probably not going to watch your kids grow up because it takes a lot of effort to diet, to do all that exercise, plus your energy is low. So I'm not even convinced that's a good lifestyle to live, to try to maintain very low levels of body fat. But the easy answer is, what did it take for you to get there? Keep doing that.
So you will be somewhere near about that. Not exactly there, but somewhere near that.
Yeah. I'm embracing. I'm gonna get lean. I was very lean last year, the leanest I've been in a long time. And despite my best intentions or near best intentions, I didn't maintain it. And okay, well, now I get to diet again and lose it again, and maybe I get better next time. So I think it's just becoming comfortable with, and let's say everybody who does that, I'm not saying you're going to gain 50 pounds of body fat. I'm just saying maybe you don't be 9%. Maybe you live in this world of 10 to 15%, and then just comfortably, go in and out of your phases. Dieting, exercise, supplements to help with getting back down to those levels.
How do you structure a diet break for anybody, and for how long?
Yeah, so diet breaks. What I personally do when I diet is I increase my calories on the weekend. That's family friendly for me. We go out to eat or bring food to our house on the weekends. And I'm naturally, because I'm not as regimented on the weekends, I'm typically hungrier because I'm not focused on work as much. So I like to increase my calories on the weekends. So I'll diet Monday through Friday. On the weekends, I'll increase my calories. Another approach is diet for, let's say, a couple weeks at a time. And when you get to the point where you're not losing as much body fat, or you're just tired of dieting, go ahead and take a week or two off and go back to maintenance calories. I would say 2 weeks is a great time. You don't gain much weight. At the most you gain is less than a kilogram, at least from our research in females. So when you take this break and you go back to maintenance calories, on average, you shouldn't expect to gain a lot of body weight, but you do have to make sure that you're staying at maintenance calories, that you're not, overeating for that 2-week period. And then the other thing I would suggest is try to keep your protein level high even during the diet break as well. That's not a time to really plummet the protein.
And in diet breaks, you increase what? You increase fat or you increase carbs or both in moderation?
Yeah, both. And then I would say a little bit more carbo. Well, based on your preferences. The study that we did where we increased calories on the weekends, we forced our subjects to only increase in carbs. But for everybody, like for people who live their lives, if you like higher fat foods, like maybe like pork products or whatever, I'm not aware of any reason to suggest that would be helpful or harmful. So go with your preference.
Okay. So when you figure out the diet breaks around the weekend, do you also recommend some sort of resistance training around that time?
My approach with resistance training is you set your resistance training program and just leave it. Whether you're dieting or not, I don't like adjusting my resistance training around my calories. Now, again, maybe it's because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to think about it. But two, you really don't want to change your intensity when you're in dieting, because that's what's going to help maintain your muscle mass. To some extent, we can also suggest that volume matters. Now, I would say volume is secondary to intensity with our training. But I will say this, in all of our research, we do not adjust the training stimulus. We only adjust the energy balance stimulus through food. So there is no adjustment for exercise. If somebody wanted to do that, is there any harm? Probably not. I just don't do it for myself, and we haven't done that in our research investigations.
Okay, great. And how well we can plan the refeeds, and for how long you can plan the refeeds?
Yeah, I like, whether it's a refeed or a diet break, I like having a plan. Let's say, so if I'm a coach, I'm going to talk to my client, hey, when you are not losing any weight for 2 consecutive weeks, let's take a break at that point. I like having a plan ahead of time rather than doing it kind of retroactively. I like to be proactive. So I think that's a great approach. I don't like, which this is how we do it in our research, we're going to take a diet break after 4 weeks of dieting, regardless if they're still losing body fat, because that's kind of how you have to do research. You have to be a little bit more standardized in your approach. So, but in practical,
from a lifestyle perspective,
yeah, I think just when you stop responding to the current plan, that's a time to reset and take a break for a week or 2 or more, and then come back. And like I said, maybe that's when we throw in a different stimulus, aerobic exercise, or some type of lipolytic agent supplement.
Yep. Well, great point, Bill. So, Bill, thank you so much for your time, in interest of time and your schedule as well. So we'll end here. So, and if in case we get an opportunity again, we'll definitely want to talk to you regarding exercise science. That is another area of your expertise, and how we can progress in that.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, and I see people thanking me as well. But
thank you so much for
that.
Just 1 minute. Would you want to talk about your course and your book, which are there on clean health?
Yeah, if anybody's interested in purchasing that, or even just looking at the general description, go to my Instagram, the link to in my bio, and that will take you right to the sales page. It is on sale for Thanksgiving, for Black Friday. It's on sale now. I don't think it will be less than this over the next year. Again, I don't determine this. The publisher determines this. So if you're thinking about getting it, this would be the best time.
So there is a question that, Bill, is your program home-based too?
Yes, I gave, there are 2 workouts that are home-based, but I do assume that you have dumbbells and a bench. as part of that. But yeah, so I do have an accommodation for home-based workouts in the guidebook.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you everyone for asking questions and being a good audience. We'll look forward to meet Bill again and have an interesting session. Thank you, Bill.
All right.
Thank you so much for your help. Yeah.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, Abby.
Well, guys, hope it was a good session and you guys were able to ask your questions from Bill. Thank you for being here and being a good audience. We'll take your leave now. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you. Hi, Ambasian. Thank you so much.